How are we doing, everyone? Welcome to Russell Heritage Golf. Today we are again talking about the initiation in towards the downswing, and we're focusing very much on the lower body. I've been talking a lot about the hips again recently, talked about the backswing position and the importance of understanding why to turn the hips, as we've discussed, but also a good accurate measure as to how to identify if you're in a good backswing position. If you've missed those videos, then go and watch them again because they're only published just a couple of days ago. What we then started doing is obviously therefore added clarity as to what it is meant when pros say do things like turn your hips deep. We then talked about the transition. I talked about the two different types of hip rotation, and what we're now doing today is we're adding again another little bit of clarity into a common feeling which is often discussed by professional golfers, which is keeping your back to the target. Now, right, what needs to happen? Well, look, the fact of the matter is that why would you want to keep your back to the target? The first problem that you need to offer yourself is that you are basically triggering a decent amount of rotation in your golf swing. So what this means is that as you swing up to the top, similar to what I discussed in the last video, you are turning your hips quickly as you initiate the downswing. As you start to initiate the downswing, hips are working nice and quick. Now, what will happen, and many of you that have been watching the channel will understand this, right, is that if I place this hip bar here to represent my hip line, okay, and I kind of just get this in line with you guys. So if I kind of swing up to the top and pause, through the correct hip rotation, my hip would push this bar back like so. Now, if I just turned my hips, so if I just kind of, should we say, pulled this one back, you can see the way, although I'm triggering a rotation, momentarily, neither hip is potentially touching the hip bar. In best case scenario, if I work really quickly, my left hip will get back onto the hip bar. But what you're looking for potentially for an optimum amount of rotation in terms of your ability to stay in posture is to, at some point in the initiation to the downswing, both hips want to be on the hip bar, which basically means, you know, you're familiar with watching, say, Dustin Johnson, for example, would almost create more of a squatting motion. And that's because both hips are finding the hip bar in the transition in towards the golf swing. So, hopefully you can understand that. Did a video on two different types of hip rotation. I talked about the difference in the orientation of the trail leg. One is more like a spin, the other one will look more like a lateral motion because of the functionality around this leg. What we're talking about today is that the spin means that only one hip in the best scenario will ever be on the hip bar. If you can work on the other method, which is, should we say, more of our squat, then you'll find at a point in time both hips, if you like, or your pelvis in its entirety will stay on the hip bar. Now the benefit to that is, well, potentially more consistency. You know, so as opposed to potentially spinning out and then trying to get the club down on play and drive the elbow, you'll tend to find that the other one will let the club drop more naturally down on towards your plane. So, hence why we tend to get differences when we hear professional golfers interviewed in terms of what they're working on or what their feelings are. You know, some golfers will talk about timing and tempo, and other golfers will say, keep my back to the target, which is what we're talking about and prompted today. Now, if I swing up towards the top, inevitably my back will go towards the target through to the amount of hip rotation. But then keeping your back to the target would mean, I suppose, for a professional golfer that they are trying not to just spin out on the ball. Okay, so they're trying to not necessarily slow down rotation. Well, they are trying to slow down rotation to some degree, but how specific they know what they're trying to do, I'm not sure. The idea is that if you have the problem where you now realise that, hang on a sec, Russ, I hadn't thought about it, I'm actually spinning out too much, right? And you're struggling to control things maybe like your club path, or you notice that you're struggling to keep your hips on the bar as you notice you move forward in transition. Then what you now need to start to do is that as you start to initiate the downswing, similar to the last video, you would create a good load in towards this trail side, and as you keep that leg outward facing, and you pull that lead leg back, it will start to create a squatting motion. Although this is still a rotary motion, you can see the way my back stays more towards the target as opposed to this sort of motion here. Now, that's what happens with when you get to that level. And I think that we're getting there, right? A lot of the things that I've talked about on the channel over the last 6 months or so has been very much about, rather than just trying to preach one method at you or an optimum method, I've kind of discussed things with an element of clarity. So I've tried to talk about the cause and effect as to why things happen in a golf swing. We've hopefully got to the stage where you understand the importance of hip rotation, and we're not trying to consciously introduce any sort of lateral motion. The weight will shift in towards the lead side, as I've been talking about, because of rotational movement. So we're trying to hypothetically suggest the problem that you now have is that you are spinning too much, which basically means that you are only able to keep one hip, if you like, on the hip bar. And what you're now trying to do is work on this squatting motion, hence the feeling of, say, common Justin Rose, who would be doing a lot of this sort of feeling. And that's what we're basically talking a little bit about at the moment. So turn deep, similar to the last video. And then, even though I am triggering a rotation, because this leg is staying in the same orientation, it starts to look more lateral, and therefore my back will look like it stays towards the target longer, and it will do relative to a spin. We're talking hips. We're trying to add clarity so that you understand exactly what it is that you're trying to work on, trying to help you guys improve. Hopefully you enjoy the video and you understand what I'm trying to portray to you. Always appreciate one of those. Remember, it's absolutely free to press that subscribe button. If you're going to do it, press the little bell icon, and I'll catch up with you guys again soon. Keep the back to the target, but only start working on this if you do have what you believe is a really good backswing position and potentially too spinny in the start towards the downswing.